Welcome back to Drawing Me Out with Bill Willingham. I'm Bill Willingham, so it only makes sense that I would be the one doing this. As always, Brad Tonti is here with us. Say hello, Brad.
Hello, Brad.
And today's episode is going to concentrate on my time doing The Elementals, which was my first hit comic book. But first, before we get to that, as per usual, let's see what's on the drawing board right now. And the reason I'm doing these what's on the drawing board things, well, there's quite a few reasons. But I get gigged a lot by older comics fans who remember when I was drawing comics more regularly. And the complaint is usually, why doesn't he draw anymore? Well, I've never stopped drawing. I have, however, slowed down considerably. And also, some of the things you liked me for, such as my run on the Elementals, were hits, and some of the things I've drawn since were not. Some of these you have to go find. We featured the book Flinch, which was what I thought was called Twitch by DC Comics last time. And I did a full, I think, 10 or 12 page, I wrote it, I inked it, I drew it, comic there. I've been working on this thing called Lark's Killer lately, and I drew one of those issues, this and that. So some of that stuff you just need to find. Right now, we are looking at one of my new projects. I've been working on this since the last video, in addition to trying to do a few more hours on those covers and a couple of scripts and various other things. But this, you can see, is something superhero-like. We have superhero characters, a very strange assortment of superhero characters, which will tie into the title when I am willing to reveal that. Fighting a big four-armed Lamia snake monsteress on a secluded island in the Aegean Sea. If you'll remember the Elementals days, it's kind of a wink at that, because the very first panel of the very first Elemental story started with a shot of a secluded island somewhere in the world. It's not a continuation of Elementals. Every once in a while there's rumors that I'm coming back to the series.
Probably not a bad idea to mention that, yeah.
Probably not a bad idea to mention that. I'm not coming back to the Elemental series. They're still owned by someone that I have no desire to work with. So anyway, big superhero fight. This page is almost done, except for the backgrounds between the Grecian-style pillars, and we'll get to that. And we have an arm. When you draw, occasionally you have to do things like this. Now, why did I do a just disembodied arm? Well, I'll show you. In the next page, which is actually a double-page spread. Do you have all of that, Brad?
Mm-hmm. Looks great.
Okay. We have a closer thing of our heroes who are not having a good time against the giant snake woman. And the problem I had was I'd drawn the giant snake woman grabbing the female, whose name I'm not going to mention. I'm not going to mention any of the characters' names. She's having a little trouble with one of the others, because it was his idea to go after this character. And then I drew the heroic guy with the lightning bolt on his quiver strap, trying to get back into action, and we have the shadowy character phasing through one of the pillars. Well, I drew all that, and then I remembered to count hands or arms. Now she's using two of them to grab the flame-headed woman, who's actually not flame, it's more plasma, but whatever. And from the position of the arms, she's using her upper right arm here and her lower left arm here. And then here's her upper left arm. And then I got all this done. I thought, uh-oh, I've got one more arm to account for. And because the upper right arm starts here, it's got to be the lower. So it needs to start somewhere here. Now, as you can see, I sort of got the arm in here. But it's difficult to just draw it that way without drawing over stuff that I'd already put down. I didn't want to do that. So what I did was draw the arm here.
You drew your own reference work, basically.
I drew my own reference work.
Nice.
Then I put it underneath here, light boxed it, and then just moved this around again until I found the best spot for it. And as a result, we have her arm.
Now, did you use an actual light box, or did you use the poor man's light box where you put it up against a window? And
poor man's light box.
Isn't that the most glorious thing ever?
I have an actual light box, or I had, but a house guest came in complaining about lack of good light box at home, and I said, I never use my light box. Here, take it with you. And I sent it with him. And then, of course, immediately
12 times needed a light box.
I needed that light box. So yeah, I used the poor man's light box, which is, you can't see it, it's off camera, but in that direction is a really nice window, and in that direction is a really nice window. So yes. And all right, so that's in progress. You can see that I do the lettering first. Well, I do a really vague layout. Then I do the lettering. I'm hand lettering this. I'm going to write it, letter it, pencil it, ink it. I will not color it when it's time for coloring, and I'll just go find someone for that. But I use the Ames lettering guide. Can we see this, Brad?
Not well. I'll drop in a little picture so they can see what's going on.
Okay.
I actually keep two of those at home. I used to be a hand letterer. I have one set to Orzechowski and one set to Klein. It's literally labeled on there so that I know, what kind of lettering style and size I like.
Yeah. I just have a little mark that shows the setting I like for just standard comics. I used to have, you can almost see it, a vague stain of a piece of tape that used to mark it,
right.
Keep it there. But I took that off because even though this is my standard setting, every once in a while I do stuff where I need to adjust. But an Ames lettering guide, if you're going to do your own lettering, it's still the best tool for the job. So yeah, I'm lettering it, I'm drawing it, I'm writing it. And that was pages 2 and 3. And then we skipped ahead to page 5, or I skipped ahead because there was a panel coming up in which they're standing around talking about something important. And that was the way in which I pinned down the final look at these characters. So that's what's on the drawing board. Let's get started. I'm going to be drawing Elementals characters, since this is about the Elementals. And I'm going to be drawing, there's a early on drawing I did to promote the Elementals back in 1983. Might have been 82. Can you see that, Brad?
Mm-hmm. Looks great.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, my drawing skills was not then what I hope they are now. So although I still like this piece, I'm not 100% happy with it. So occasionally artists do recreations of popular past work. I've never done one, but I'm going to do one now. Because of that, this time, there won't be a finished sketch by the end of it. It might take 2 or 3 episodes to get it done, which is why our Elementals themed episode, this one, is part 1 of either 2 or 3. It doesn't mean that the next episode is going to continue about the Elementals. It just means that we're going to revisit this subject from time to time. But that's what I'm going to work on. And since we want something for our eBay auction every episode, I dug up my 2 remaining Elementals pages. I own no other Elementals pages that I know of. I actually have one Elementals cover that will be coming along someday. But this is from Elementals issue 22, page 26. It barely features the Elementals characters, 2 of them right here, and then again there, which is probably why this one lasted as long as it did. And also, from the same issue, page 23, is a page featuring the villain, who, God, what was his name?
If you remember or have that issue, comment down in the comments down below. Let us know who he was.
Right. Well, he was a televangelist, semi-visually based on someone you might recognize, semi-visually based. But he was the villain in this, and I have that page. And so we're going to put these, since this is Elementals Day, I'm going to part with my last 2 Elementals pages. We'll put these on the eBay, and Brad will either offer them as a set or as individuals, depending on what he feels is best. All right, so we will start drawing, and we're going to talk about the Elementals. Why is the Elementals important, or at least on my mind? It's important to me, obviously, because this was my first hit comic series. It's almost my first comics work, but not quite. How did the Elementals come about? Well, I was living in New York, trying to break into Marvel Comics. When I tell the story, I often say trying to break into Marvel and DC. But true confession time, even though I would have taken any comic work offered at the time, I did not have a strong desire to work for DC as much as Marvel. Marvel was my goal at the time. I eventually got some Marvel work, but not then. So I'm out there living in Stony Brook, Long Island, trying to find comic work and not succeeding. So, because the independent movement in comics was just starting up full swing, Pacific Comics started. Pacific Comics introduced us to some of Jack Kirby's later work, and some other things. First Comics introduced us to American Flag and a comic they called Warp, which is not to be confused with Warp Graphics, the publisher of ElfQuest. Warp was based on a stage play that kind of aped superheroes in a operatic, though no singing, I believe, setting. And then there were a few other, Capital, who introduced us to Nexus, Badger, a few other things. So these independent comic companies were going great guns. Now, for Marvel, I did Marvel characters because that's what they wanted to see. I decided I was going to try to interest one of these other companies, but I was not going to do individual sample pages for each one. That's a lot of work. And even though I was willing to do a lot of work at the time, not that much. So I decided to create some generic sample pages. 6, because as we've heard, that's the right number. 6 pages whose purpose was to show that I knew how to draw. And I decided, since superheroes were my wheelhouse kind of thing at the time, I would just create a generic superhero team just so that I could do 6 pages of samples for all these companies, hoping they could extrapolate and say, okay, these are not our characters, but This guy can draw. That was my plan. So I created a generic superhero team. The generic superhero team, strictly for the purpose of breaking in the comics that I created, were the Elementals. I'd just come out of TSR at the time. I recalled the creatures one can encounter in Dungeons and Dragons called Elementals. So why not? That was thematically a good idea for a superhero team. I believe at about that time, John Byrne, who was just beginning or at the height of his run on the Fantastic Four, in one of the interviews, pointed out that the Fantastic Four is very close to being an elementally themed team. And what he meant was the Thing is the element of rock. The Mr. Fantastic is very close, being liquid and rubbery, to being the element of water. The Torch, obviously, the element of fire. And the Invisible Girl being the element of air. That's was a bit of a stretch, but invisible force fields, air is invisible but vital. So I get it. Sure, why not? So I did samples called the Elementals, and then I made copies of these, put some packages together, and mail bombed every one of these publishers to say, come, let me work for your company. Amongst the comics that I had collected in hopes of familiarizing myself with the independent movement, was a comic called Justice Machine, published by Noble Comics, based in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and published by a very good artist named Mike Gustovich and his wife, Sue Fillmore. They were the very first, as a matter of fact, the only, I'll never quite know, because I packed up my bags and took off the moment they said they were interested. But they were the first to get back to me. As a matter of fact, by the timing of the mail, my samples could have only reached them that day. And then right away the fellow was on the phone to me. So I enjoyed that enthusiasm. But he said, come and work for us. We can work through the mail. I go, nope, I'm gonna move there. And
packed up the truck and moved to Beverly.
I did. I actually didn't have a truck at the time. I took the bus, but I'm okay with the bus. Her thumb is broken. Let's fix that. So I headed for Grand Rapids. It was a long and grueling bus trip, but I got there. Mike Gustovich met me at the bus, introduced me to his wife, introduced me to the guest room bedroom wherein I'd be staying until I got a apartment of my own. And then we went for a walk to discuss what I would be doing for Noble Comics. And we had that discussion because I asked him, so Mike, what will I be doing for Noble Comics? Now, at that time, Noble Comics published a superhero team called the Justice Machine, which coincidentally had a character named Monolith. And he said, that's okay, we can we can deal with 2 characters named Monolith. I thought I would have to change that. But I asked Mike, what am I going to be doing for Noble Comics? And they had also just announced that they were going to do a new superhero called Cobalt Blue. And we were walking in a park in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and Mike got this kind of weird look on his face when I had asked, what am I going to be doing for Noble Comics? And he said, well, clearly what you're going to be doing is that comic series you pitched us. And I went, what comic series? I didn't pitch a comic series. I created the Elementals specifically just to show that I could draw. So he goes, that comic series you pitched us, Elementals. And he had this kind of concerned look on his face, like, you are aware of that comic series, Elementals, aren't you? And I go, well, of course that, yes, I'll be doing that. Yeah, right. But I meant, is there anything else you want me to work on until we get that up and running? Or, I'm pretty fast in the business.
Good save there.
Yeah. But no, of course, Elementals. And that's how I found out that I would be doing a comic series called The Elementals. And that's where I had to start to figure out what the story of the Elementals would be about.
When you sent it into him, was it the sequential art telling a story of some sort?
Well, it was, in the sense that it was 6 pages of, starts with a guy guarding a dock that has all sorts of weird secret weapons clandestinely coming in. And the elemental characters start taking out the guards one by one. And then by the end of the 6 pages, they've sort of taken over the dock and had discovered the contraband. And this was going to be, just what could this be about? Who will the villains be? But there was no answer to that question, because I didn't have any villains in mind. This wasn't going to be a comic book. I ended up not using those 6 pages, and I kind of wonder what happened to those. I ended up not using those 6 pages because by the time I had finished, thought out what the story was going to be, there was no scene at a dock with illegal weapons coming in. In retrospect, I now can think easily of a way to have made that part of the initial story, but not then. So I never used those sample pages, and I would show them to you, but I have no idea what became of them. But Noble Comics, the makers of Justice Machine, was going to be the first publisher of the Elementals, and they almost made it. In future episodes, we'll talk about how the Elementals was finally published, how many different companies went broke trying to publish them before Kamiko finally succeeded, and then how they became, partly through the fact that it was kind of a breath of fresh air where the superhero market, which had become a bit moribund at the time, was heading, and partly because of a comic shop in Kalamazoo, Michigan. Elementals became a hit. One of the first independent hits, and certainly the first independent hit that was a superhero team.
Awesome. Well, then what we'll do is we'll we'll let you sketch for a bit. We'll kind of speed it up and watch. We aren't going to do the whole thing. We'll save some up for the next video. And we'll go into depth with the next step of the elementals, the superhero team that wasn't a pitch, but ended up being, you know.
Oh, it was a pitch. It was a pitch
for the
for
storytelling.
me as
Right.
an artist. It accidentally was a proposal for a comic series.
Beautiful.
That was, I want to say, late 1981, early 1982. I believe the first Elementals was finally published in 1983, but you might need this back to check that. All right, so we have our sketch underway, and thank you folks very much for tuning in. As you might guess, we're trying to shorten the time of individual videos. We're shooting for 30 minutes as our golden time. We will settle for 40 minutes if it needs to be, but we don't want any more videos pushing an hour. That's too much of your time to ask for. Please hit that angry red button down below. That is the subscribe button. That is how we build an audience. If you will, like the thing. Is that a thing? Do we do likes?
It's a thing. We like, we share, and we subscribe. So you tell us you like it. You subscribe so you know that there's more coming out each time, and then you share it with your friends because you don't like them. No, you want them to watch. That's what it was.
Okay. Please do that. We would like to build up enough of an audience to make the time and the reasonable expense of this worth doing. Thanks, and we'll see you again soon.